Hello, today we're joined by two prominent figures in maritime labour leadership to discuss a concerning report on the decline of merchant fleets and seafarers across NATO member nations. With me are Mark Dickinson, General Secretary of Nautilus International, representing maritime professionals in the UK, the Netherlands and Switzerland. And Don Marcus, President Emeritus of the International Organization of Masters, Mates and Pilots, representing American mariners. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good evening.
Mark, can you start by giving us a flavour on what the report is about?
Okay, so a little bit of background and history. Don and I were invited over to address the transport group of NATO in Brussels in November last year. And we've been invited, well, largely because Don had some great contacts with the US administration, but we'd issued, as the Nautilus Federation, a press release around this time last year, because it was the 75th anniversary of the NATO Alliance. And it struck us that in this time of heightened global tensions with all sorts of wars and arenas of conflict breaking out. We've got Houthi rebels attacking ships in the Red Sea. We've got Russia invading Ukraine, etc., etc. This was bringing NATO and the NATO alliance into sharp relief. And it struck us that our experience, certainly in the UK and in the US and in other Nautilus Federation NATO countries, was of a declining mercantile marine, declining national seafarers. And we wanted to highlight that the NATO's commitment to its Article 5, an injury to one is an injury to all type response, was somewhat undermined by the fact that there was this declining mercantile marine capability, which would be essential, critical to the delivery of that Article 5 commitment. So we issued the press release. We got invited over, thanks to Don's efforts, to address the Transport Committee. And Don and I gave a presentation together, and we made a pledge to them that we would come back with a more detailed study of the basic assumption that we were making, that there was this decline across the fleet and across the seafarers. So that's what we've done. We've worked hard with the help of some research carried out for us, and the report is the result. And we are hoping that we will be able to get this back on the table of those at NATO and US and UK administrations and others, and get them to pay due account of this, because the subject matter is very much in sharp focus today. Of course, we have a new president in the USA who's pointing out many of the problems that exist, particularly with NATO's members' defense spending. And from my point of view, unless they address the basic conclusions that we've drawn and the policy recommendations that we're making in this report, it's all going to be wasted, because they won't be able to deploy the forces and the assets to where they're needed without our people and our members and our ships. So it's getting rather urgent now. So very timely, I think.
Yes, well, we will definitely come to those policy recommendations a little bit later in this interview. But Mark, you did mention there this decline in the number of national flagged vessels and qualified seafarers across NATO member countries. Could you paint a picture of what's happened to the UK fleet and seafarer numbers over recent decades?
Well, the headline is as we knew it anyway, but now it's nice to have the research done to back it up. There has been a sharp decline in UK flagged vessels, particularly of the type that we would need, the larger ocean-going vessels, and a very significant decline in British seafarers. That's the first thing I would say about the UK experience. Second thing I would say about the UK experience is that the measures introduced in the year 2000 to support flag growth, UK flag growth, and investment in UK skills have, if I'm being balanced about this, and I'd like to be, the tonnage tax, the state, the subsidy, the fiscal incentives to grow the flag and grow the skills base that was introduced in the European model, because we were then in the EU, have failed to grow the flag and grow the skills. The best, to be balanced, the best I would say is that they've stabilized the decline. So it's, the decline was a sharp decline. That was the forecast in 2000. And today we've had a sort of shallower glide path, let's say, but still a decline. Of course, we had a financial crisis in 2008, 2009. That didn't help. We've had COVID, and we have not recovered in terms of our training numbers since 2020. And we're only training about 500 cadets a year. And by the industry's own admission, we need 2,000 new entrants, cadets, trainees a year, and we're only securing about 500. So the situation is now getting rather dire. Tonnage tax is not working, and we don't have the Merchant Navy, and we don't have the British Merchant Navy skills in order to support the nation's maritime security and national resilience, which COVID exposed quite brutally in recent times.
Yes, thank you very much. Obviously, some very big things in there to explore a bit more, but I'd like to, if I can, bring Don in at this point. Don, if you would be able to give us a little bit of that US experience. Was that similar to what Marcus described here in the UK and Europe? We know that the US Merchant Marine has been described as the fourth arm of defense. Perhaps you can describe that experience and explain the historical significance of that concept for us, please.
Yes, well, the situation with the U.S. Merchant Marine is similar to what has happened in the UK. It's been, in our case, a more gradual decline, really since the 50s and 1960s. It's been a decline based on competitiveness in large part, and lack of a coherent national policy. In the United States, the Merchant Marine always gets a lot of attention when there's time of war or threats of war. As one of our members quoted in a study, in time of war, no cost is too high to support the Merchant Marine. In times of peace, any cost is too high. And that's the way it's been. Going back to the Spanish-American War in 1898, when there weren't enough U.S. ships to support our troops overseas in Cuba and the Philippines. World War I, we had a depression in 1914 in this country when there weren't enough ships to carry our foreign trade, as the European belligerents all recalled their own merchant vessels. A program was developed after 2 years in Congress, weeding its way through in 1916, which built up the Merchant Marine. But most of these vessels weren't built until after the end of the First World War. Then there was a glut in shipping. Then the Merchant Marine was ignored. And as war clouds loomed again in the 30s, the Merchant Marine Act of 1936 built and was responsible for the growth of the Merchant Marine, really sustained, was one of the main reasons for victory in the Second World War in the North Atlantic. So merchant marine policy in the United States has always been influenced by war or threats of war. And we see that today where there finally, as Mark noted, there finally seems to be some acknowledgement that, hey, there is a problem here with the U.S. maritime power and the state of the U.S. merchant marine relative to our ability to support our economy and support our troops in a conflict. So it's in the historical pattern. It's really nothing new. There's concern about China, concern about what's going on in Europe, obviously, with the war in Ukraine, and the realization is apparent to everybody in the military. And simply, we need logistics. We need a stronger national merchant marine if we're going to rely on our own resources for defense. And the same is true, of course, of NATO collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So Thank you very much for giving us that perspective from the US and the US experience there. Mark, if I could come back to you and focus on the UK experience. You mentioned tonnage tax in your description there. For people who don't know about that policy, it was introduced in 2000. What was it intended to achieve at the time, and why do we believe that it has failed to reverse the decline in UK shipping?
Okay, well, look, tonnage tax is a state aid system, fiscal support permissible under EU, what are referred to the EU state aid guidelines for maritime transport. So when we were a member of the EU, state subsidies are not something that the common market ordinarily supported, because in the analysis, they distort markets, and they consume resources that would be better invested elsewhere. But because of maritime is understood to be more complex, or very complex, to be global, and you face global competition, there are exemptions from the general rules about state aids. And these guidelines set the framework for that. These guidelines in 2000 had two clear obligations and goals for the support. The support could be to tax the ships on their tonnage rather than on their profits. The support could be for training subsidies towards the cost of training new entrants into the industry, and you could make some concessions on social security taxes. You could basically zero rate those. But in the UK, we adopted two approaches. We adopted the sort of common tonnage tax approach, and we had smart funding support for maritime training, which was an acceptable subsidy within the system, within the guidelines. And then in return for those subsidies and those fiscal incentives, the goal is grow the flag, the UK flag, and grow the skills base. So growing the flag, there was no flag requirement for the tonnage tax. It was you do need to be based in the UK. There needs to be what we would call a genuine link between the company that's accessing the state aid and the UK. And companies moved here, relocated, set up businesses here, and through a process of being responsive to the ship owners' needs, the MCA, the Maritime Coast Guard Agency, was also reformed by the government, and that was meant to be a kind of, we are good, we are a high quality flag, please consider us. So there was a carrot and stick. Well, there wasn't much stick, but there was quite a bit of carrot involved in come and flag here. There was no obligation to do so, but it was kind of, well, you're going to be here, you're going to use our tax system, you're going to access our tax benefits, you're going to train our seafarers. I'll get to that in a minute. So please fly the flag. And there was some initial growth. It was quite successful initially, and there was a spike in UK flag growth. And of course, you have to train one cadet for every 15 officers in the fleet that's entered into the tonnage tax, and there was growth in the numbers of cadets being trained. So initially, hugely successful for the then government. So we were all very happy. Cadets were being trained and ships were entering the flag. Of course, if you don't pay attention, the industry is constantly evolving and moving, and somebody else will come along and say, our tonnage tax is better than yours, and we've done this, and we've all within the permissible rules, of course. And so some of that interest drifts away to the next new thing in the industry, and you lose a little bit of this. And if you don't pay attention, if you don't stay on top of it, then you start to see, and this is what happened, you start to see a decline. There was also the financial collapse, of course, of 2008, 2009. That didn't help the shipping industry. And actually since then, you can see tailing off. And now actually today, you've got a situation where the majority of vessels on the UK tonnage tax are now foreign flag vessels. We suspect that many of those, because of course it's all confidential tax information, you don't really know who's in the tonnage tax unless they declare it themselves, and you don't know which ships are in or out. You only get you only get high level statistics. You don't get the granular detail. You can't identify who's who. So the majority of ships on the UK tonnage tax are not UK registered. I suspect quite a few of them will be the Red Ensign Group. We could talk a little bit about that later if you want. But 78% of the officers are not UK officers, and 88% of the ratings on UK tonnage tax vessels are not British, they're foreign. So the skills growth issue failed, the flag growth issues failed. So tonnage tax is not delivering what it says on the tin and what the guidelines, state aid guidelines, set out as the key objectives. Now, we're not in the EU anymore, so we're not obliged to follow the EU state aid guidelines anymore. But of course, the government did commit to maintaining the system within the framework of those guidelines. In other words, nothing was essentially going to change. The rules would apply, and the goals are the same. So this is a real issue here, because whilst not set out specifically within the framework of NATO and Article 5. Incidentally, Article 3 of the NATO treaty is also relevant, because that's about civil resilience and preparedness. Actually, this is essentially what we're talking about here. Don and I are not only saying that the defence issue is the reason why the NATO members need to address this decline. It's also from the COVID experience, and being ready and being supplied. Now, as an island nation, with everything comes in and out, 90% of everything comes in and out on ships. And when those ships are stuck, or they're other people's ships with other priorities, perhaps in that moment of a global pandemic, then, well, how do you get all your medicines? How do you get your fuel? How do you get the fresh food that you need? It really does bring into sharp focus that whole resilience piece. So that's a really important aspect of this. But we are now totally reliant on foreign shipping and foreign seafarers. Seems to me to be a rather crucial issue for the nation.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps we can come to another issue that is affecting this, which is flags of convenience. But before we come on to that, could I go back to you, Don? Because Mark's very aptly described the subsidy system under which the UK has been operating since 2000. Now, the United States has got a slightly different system, hasn't it? And the US has maintained the Jones Act bit of legislation called the Jones Act since 1920. Could you explain what that legislation does and whether it's been more effective than policies in other NATO countries?
Well, we think that the Jones Act, which is America's cabotage law protecting domestic shipping, is critical to the survival of the merchant marine. And as you mentioned, it goes back to 1920, when there was a glut of ships that were built during and after World War I, and how to dispose of these ships. The law was created to try to keep a domestic industry strong and maintain a certain percentage of U.S. flag shipping, not only in domestic trade, but the hope was also in international trade. As it has turned out, the Jones Act, the pillar has been obviously domestic trade. It's a cabotage law. It protects shipbuilding. It requires a U.S. crew, 100% U.S. citizen officers, 75% citizen unlicensed personnel, and the other 25% need to be documented aliens, registered aliens, green card applicants. So, and U.S. ownership. So it's a protective legislation. It protects a critical industry, and it's responsible in large part for maintaining the U.S. maritime cluster that still exists, both in terms of seafaring, seafarers, shipbuilders, and ship owners. The other two pillars of the U.S. Maritime policy, such as it is cargo preference, which has been watered down over many years, but requires a certain percentage, now 50% of government-impelled cargo to be carried aboard U.S. vessels, if those vessels are available, and also two programs, a maritime security program and the tanker security program, which together combined maintain 70 vessels in international trade by virtue of providing a relatively modest stipend to the ship owner to offset lower costs of foreign competition.
Right. And this Jones Act, I understand it has come under, attack over the years. There's lots of interest that would love to see this legislation watered down or, in fact, gotten rid of. What current state of support does it have within the country, are you aware of?
Well, the Jones Act is always under attack. Anytime there's a hurricane, during COVID, during any sort of conflict, there's always someone that says that the Jones Act is a hindrance. This is not true. The Jones Act is a lifesaver for our domestic industry, and it costs the taxpayer nothing. The argument is, well, it costs the consumers. Actually, if you look at a can of tomatoes or an automobile being transported in a foreign flag versus a U.S. flag, we're talking a marginal differential. And for that marginal differential to the consumer, you're maintaining a critical economic and military asset. So we believe it's a good value. In the current administration and the current Congress, the Jones Act, notwithstanding that there's at least three bills out there to water down or torpedo the Jones Act, we believe that there's still strong support, bipartisan support for the Jones Act because anyone with common sense or anyone with a sense of history, knowledge of history, understands that military and economic independence require maritime power, and that means you need to have and maintain a reasonable merchant fleet.
Right. And to bring this back to the UK context, Mark, of course, we don't have a cabotage here in the UK. We don't have that type of protective legislation. It is something that the union, Nautilus International, has campaigned on over the years. What is our position on cabotage, and would we like to see this brought into the UK?
Yes, in short, and I think your assessment of the current situation is fair. But what I would say is we've started to make well, let's call it the P&O ferries impact or effect. We've now got the national minimum wage extended to all vessels calling at any port more than 120 times in a year. That's starting to look a bit cabotagey. We've got the Seafarers Welfare Charter that was introduced as a voluntary charter by the last government, being incorporated into the Employment Rights Bill. It's making its way through Parliament as we speak, which will bring in elements of that and make it mandatory. We have also the French law that was brought in after the P&O ferry scandal, which achieves much the same in terms of minimum wages, maximum roster lengths of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks on, and followed by 2 weeks off, and other measures to address social dumping in that short sea traffic. We have Norway on the cusp of introducing cabotage in Norwegian waters, and we can start to see here and in our neighbours policies being taken up unilaterally and bilaterally to address the issues that the Jones Act seeks to address in the context of the USA. So I'm hopeful that actually we are starting to see a more comprehensive cabotage policy approach to protect and support UK shipping. Because when you say protect, people jump on this and say, oh, you want protectionism. And, for the last 30, 40 years, maybe longer, that's been seen as a dirty word. You're not allowed to protect your industry. But of course, protecting a critical Don is a very, very clear and concise advocate for this in his explanation. You're protecting and supporting a vital economic and strategic resource, the mercantile marine, what we call the merchant navy. And without it, you are left exposed and reliant on third parties, on predominantly flags of convenience and foreign seafarers. So it is, it's crucial. It's crucial that we address this. Our report is clear about what needs to be done. And it clearly sets out the scale of the problem and offers some solutions. I'm not saying we've got all the solutions. We've made a number of conclusions and recommendations, and Don and I'm sure, and others would be happy to debate those with people who may have a different view. But I'm pretty clear in my mind what needs to be done. The US gives us many of the answers and potential solutions, and cargo preferences. Restricting UK coastwide trade to UK ships with UK crews and combinations thereof could be very important possible policy interventions for the UK to protect our maritime security and our national resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've mentioned flags of convenience a number of times now in this conversation, haven't we? Could you explain, perhaps, Mark, while we're with you, could you explain what these are and why Nautilus International sees them as problematic?
Okay, well, so flags of convenience, it's a term that's been bandied around throughout history, but probably most importantly from around 1930 onwards. And Don was talking about the glut of ships after First and also the Second World Wars. And many of these ships were taken up by Greek and US ship owners, and they were not too keen on being regulated in part by strong trade unions in those countries, and they decided to flag those vessels in countries like Liberia, Panama, Honduras at that time, and others, so that they could operate free from restrictions of comprehensive labour agreements and collective bargaining, powerful trade unions representing the seafarers, but also lax enforcement of legislation such as it was back then, and lower taxes, of course, as well. Many of the modern flags of convenience appear not only on a list that's put together by the International Transport Workers Federation, but also on the list that the OECD maintains on non-cooperative countries and offshore tax havens, because there's an overlap here between the two. What flags of convenience represent in a sort of legal context is international law, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and if there are listeners who want to delve into this, Article 91 and Article 94 are where you need to look. And this is where there is a requirement for a genuine link between the ship owner and the flag. And FOCs, there is no link. So they're an abrogation of international law. They shouldn't exist, but they do. And they are now the dominant force in world shipping. The majority of ships are now registered in flags of convenience. And the top three are Panama, Liberia, and the Marshall Islands. And there are no Panamanian or Liberian or Marshall Island ship owners. They're all American, European, Japanese owners, and they are there because they are convenient. And they undermine and they corrode the governance of the shipping industry. And any flag state like the US or the UK that wants to do the right thing, that wants to regulate fairly, but firmly, that wants to increase standards, faces an FOC that will do the exact opposite and will offer and market themselves to undermine that very premise. So how many times I've sat in front of the UK, the Maritime Coast Guard Agency or a shipping minister, and they say, look, Mark, we'd love to increase the manning levels on UK ships to improve safety and reduce fatigue. But if we put one extra officer on the safe manning certificate, all the ship owners will go to an FOC that will offer them one less. So there was nothing we can do. And we can take it to the IMO and we can go to the ILO, and it won't make a jot of difference because Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands, Honduras. I mean, it gets ridiculous now because we've got Moldova, we've got Belize, we've got landlocked Central Asian countries offering registry opportunities. We've got West African countries now offering registries for the dark fleet for Russia so they can evade the embargo on their oil exports. I mean, if that isn't a reason to take action against the abuse of UNCLOS and the creation of the whole FOC system, I don't know what is. But they are not run for the convenience of the seafarers that we represent. That's the headline for me. They are illegal, and the system should be shut down. And we should everything we do policy-wise should be directing ship owners who want support, fiscal incentives, subsidies, whatever it is, should be linked to the UK flag and US flag in the case of America, and not, oh, well, we don't care where you flag and here's the taxpayers' money, you crack on. I mean, that's just patently ridiculous.
Thank you, Mark. You've really aptly described the corrosive effect of flags of convenience there. And yet, Don, in the US context, some might argue that the Jones Act does protect against that corrosive effect. And yet this report that we've put out shows that US sea lift capacity would meet only 65% of needs. So what specific vulnerabilities does this create? Do FOCs have a part in this? What is being proposed to kind of address the vulnerabilities?
Well, the Jones Act only protects domestic shipping, and it prevents the flag of convenience or any other carrier from engaging in domestic trade, which includes the non-contiguous states and some U.S. territories. So it protects a portion of the shipping. Right now, the Jones Act uh, vessels, there's about 90 vessels in the Jones Act trade right now, which is about half the deep sea U.S. merchant marine fleet. We've got another 90 or 100 ships, uh, depending on how you want to count them, engaged in international trade. But the international trade vessels are the ones that are subject to undercutting and competition from flag of convenience vessels. So it's important to distinguish the two trades. Jones Act is critical. It maintains a minimum maritime base in domestic industry. But our domestic industry in 2025 is not what it was in 1925 because the coastwise shipping is nothing like it used to be. Coastwise shipping in the United States, intercoastal trade between the coast through the Panama Canal is nothing like it used to be simply because land transportation, railroads, trucking have reduced the cost advantage of shipping and less handling costs. So the domestic industry has been very static. It has not grown. It has not particularly shrunk, but the number of ships have shrunk because the ships have gotten larger and the crews smaller. So the domestic industry is stable, but it's not gonna increase unless there was a national policy to increase coastwise shipping, short sea shipping as it's called. On the international side, absolutely what Mark said is spot on. The flag of convenience system is undermines and really puts all bona fide national maritime flags under intense pressure that undermines their competitiveness. The only way around this is to roll back the flag of convenience system, which of course we've been calling for decades. But to increase the international trade, the U.S. would require a national maritime policy, just as in the UK, same. You need a national policy. NATO should encourage the member states to have national maritime policies that facilitate citizen mariners, a national industry, national cluster, and not allow citizen owners to offshore their workplaces, offshore their skills. For example, it's estimated something like 78% of U.S. owned vessels are under a foreign flag or flag of convenience. This is outrageous. So there are many owners making a lot of money off flag of convenience vessels, and they're not putting that money into the national economy or into the national industry. So agree 100% with Mark's characterization.
Question for both of you, Mark and Don. Looking at the bigger picture, the report suggests that NATO nations are facing a critical decline in maritime capability. How can the US and UK learn from each other's experience on how to address the common challenges?
Well, I think we share history. The First World War, the Second World War, what could be more illustrative than the Second World War and the North Atlantic convoys and the logistical problems and the potential blockade of the UK, both with military equipment and food. So, I mean, I think we all should understand through history the vulnerabilities that we have. And I think every NATO nation or maritime nation needs to have a maritime policy and foster their industry. It's a strategic, critical industry, not only for military security, but also for economic security, and particularly the UK and the US. We live and die on foreign trade, our economies. I mean, you go back to Sir Walter Raleigh, and who said, "He who controls the seas controls trade. He who controls trade controls the riches of the world and the world itself." So China recognizes that.
Yeah.
They see the importance of maritime industry. They foster it. They support it. They protect it, God forbid, and they're building it. And I think the rise of China is the only thing that is caused the light bulb to go on in the U.S. Defense establishment and perhaps hopefully NATO to say, hey, we have a problem here. But there needs to be a national will with all the member states to do something about it rather than just say we have a problem here. And there is some movement in the states. We hope that moves forward, some legislation, but it takes national will and a commitment and serious financial investment to build an industry, really not from the ashes, but from pretty close to the ashes.
Mark, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, look, I can't really add anything to the excellent intervention there from Don. I would wholly endorse that. The point Don makes about China has sort of has researched the history and said, do you know what? That's what we need to do. They've got their one belt, one road policy. They've got their policy of growing their domestic and military maritime capacity, and it's our playbook, which we've forgotten and we've moved on from because, well, for various reasons, globalization, the growth of flags of convenience, the ready availability of third party shipping and third party seafarers, and all the the major maritime nations, NATO members, have taken their eye off the ball. Meanwhile, China's been building up its capacity, and now we're seeing the consequences of that. I mean, China's not the only potential problem for the UK and for the US and other NATO members. Of course, Russia being courted by everybody and then decided to invade Ukraine, and now, of course, we clearly see them as being a problem, and instability in the Middle East and elsewhere, and the vulnerability of a nation. All maritime nations are vulnerable when shipping becomes at risk because of these conflicts. So we've got major pinch points around the world. We've seen what happens when a container ships get stuck in Suez. We've seen what happens because of the environmental consequences for Panama having to limit transits because of the lack of water. We've seen what happens in the Red Sea because of the Houthi rebels and how that destabilizes global supply chains and just-in-time production. And suddenly we see ourselves exposed. And COVID was another unfortunate example of what happens when your security, your national maritime security, and your national resilience isn't, front and center of your strategic policy considerations. And Don's absolutely right. This is going to need, for me, a complete reset We've been talking about flags of convenience, a genuine link, effective control of shipping and ships by bona fide flag states for the best part of 70 years since the ITF initiated the campaign in the 1940s. And that campaign is as relevant today as it ever was. And the best thing we can say about that campaign is, well, many things we can say about it. But firstly, everybody knows what a flag of convenience is. You could ask a kid on the street, they'd tell you what it was. And that's down to this campaigning about it. And secondly, the ITF has managed to cover, about 50% of the flag of convenience fleet with minimum collective bargaining agreements to protect the seafarers on board. And that is no small feat, and it's really, really important. But actually, we still need to focus on destroying the system, because we need to put ships back or put them into bona fide flag states where there is effective control by the flag state, where there is a genuine link. And everything should be focused on that. All the policy interventions, all the fiscal incentives and subsidies should be focused on delivering that outcome. Reward good behavior. Reward ship owners who say, do you know what? Yeah, I should be supporting my nation. I should be flying my ship. The flag on my ship should be my flag, the British flag or the US flag or any other NATO member flag, because it is the right thing to do. And with the right support from the government and the right strategies in place, like cabotage, like the Jones Act, and other types of cabotage legislation, like we have the beginnings of in the UK, can support successful businesses. They can be profitable, they can make a living, and they can employ our people and give them good, secure jobs. That's the reset that's needed. There is a model out there. There is a convention that was adopted in '86 called the United Nations Convention on the Registration of Ships. And that determined that the way you establish a genuine link is either through the majority of the shareholders being based in the flag state, or the majority of the seafarers come from that flag state. That's how you establish that genuine link. And I think that convention was well, it wasn't welcomed in '86, particularly not by the shipping industry. But that needs a look at again today. That's what we need to be focused on. How do we drive ships back to being effectively controlled by bona fide flag states, not by flag states that are run by a bunch of lawyers in Reston, Virginia, or by an office in Piraeus of lawyers or agents. That this makes a mockery of the whole system, and the shadow fleet is currently right now shining a very bad light on the global ship registration practices. And I know that there are people exercised about that, but it's something that needs to be addressed.
Well, thank you, Mark. You've touched upon some international responses there, or potential international responses, I should say. Could I put a final question to you? The report emphasizes the need for policy reforms. If you could implement 3 specific changes to UK maritime policy tomorrow, what would they be and why?
Well, I suppose the first one, just to be consistent, we need to continue that journey towards a comprehensive cabotage policy for the UK. That would, like it does in the States, would underpin a maritime industry for our resilience and security, and support the employment of UK seafarers. So those 2 objectives would be really, really important. Secondly, I would remove Category 1 status for the Red Ensign group of registers other than for the UK ship register. So that would take it away from Bermuda, the Isle of Man, and the Cayman Islands as 3 key ones, and drive or incentivize the ship owners to come back to the UK ship register. I mean, obviously they'd have a choice. They could go to another FOC that has no link to the UK. But the idea that the UK government props up a system of alternative ship registers to its own register is pretty ludicrous in the context of trying to grow your own flag and having policies for that. And so I suppose my third policy then would be for the UK to have a clear strategy to grow the UK flag that links in all the issues that we've been covering in this piece today. To grow the flag, to grow the skills, incentivize in return for subsidies, and support systems and fiscal incentives drive that, link everything up. Procurement, government procurement. Again, there are examples in the report, but the US is a standout example of that, notwithstanding that Don has identified that some of them need greater attention and more support because they've been allowed to drift. But those policy interventions that the US has had, cargo preferences and that kind of thing, I think would be a really important element of an overarching strategy that has that key focus: grow the flag and grow the skills in return for the support, and not give support to people who frankly are not committed to the UK flag or to UK seafarers. And sadly, the tonnage tax seems to be full of ship owners that fit that bill.
Thanks, Mark. Could you actually explain for us what the Red Ensign Group is, please?
Okay, so the Red Ensign Group is a group of registries, ship registries, that the UK facilitates and coordinates. There are crown dependencies and overseas territories. Now, the most important aspect of this, of the REG, they fly the Red Ensign, but they fly a defaced version. So the Isle of Man has 3 legs on it, and the Bermuda has another version, etc. So category 1, they are allowed to have unlimited tonnage and unlimited types of vessel on their register. So that's a direct competition to the UK ship register. I'll just give you, so it's in the REG group, category 1 is the UK, the Isle of Man, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, and Gibraltar. So imagine this. You want to grow the UK flag, that's your policy objective, and you introduce tonnage tax as one mechanism by which you try to do that. And then you help and support and administer and help administer a whole bunch of other registers who have the same objective to grow their flag. That does not make any sense whatsoever to me. You're basically, this would be like Tesco subsidizing Aldi and then complaining that Aldi's stealing market share from them. I mean, that's how ludicrous the whole system is. So the REG needs to be looked at. The UK needs to either just scrap it and let those registers wither or die on their own. I mean, by the way, this is quite important in the context of maritime security, because if British naval forces or NATO forces are deployed to protect merchant shipping, then the UK will insist that the REG registers are also protected. So they get the protection in those arenas where that would be important. So there's, if there is an incentive to come under the UK flag because you know that the UK has a navy and can protect you in the Red Sea, for example, or when we had the piracy problem in Somalia, then you're also offering the same cover for REG flag. That doesn't make any sense. There's no navy in the Cayman Islands. They haven't got a navy. They can't protect you. It's just patently ridiculous. If your goal, and the goal apparently is for government to grow the UK flag, when you offer the same support and services to a whole bunch of other flags. So there's a whole bunch of other flags in category 2, but they have restricted tonnage. So effectively, they're restricted to more local fishing boats, maybe, or private yachts and things like that. So they're not really the problem. And the only thing you could say for the REG, and this is the only excuse that you'll get from government as to why they do it, is that they help those flags maintain the highest possible safety standards and adherence to international legislation. And isn't that a good thing? Well, of course, it is a good thing, but it's not really the UK's sole task to do that. That's a job for the IMO and the ILO and the EU in the context of Europe. So it's a pretty weak excuse in my mind.
Well, thank you for that explanation, Mark. Don, I'm going to put the final question to you. What 3 policy changes would you implement for US Merchant Marine, and why?
Well, the first and most important, which really covers a dozen different factors, would be national maritime policy, passing legislation to have a comprehensive maritime policy that includes not only growing the U.S. flag, but training, recruitment of seafarers, shipbuilding, supporting the industry. This is critical to have a national maritime policy. In the United States, there used to be a House Committee on Merchant Marine and Fisheries for over 100 years. This was ruled determined to be unnecessary in the late 80s. And right now, merchant marine policy is spread over a dozen different congressional agencies. The Maritime Administration does not have a sufficient budget, a sufficient clout in the Department of Transportation to get much done within the resources they've been allocated. So we need a national maritime policy that would support the existing subsidy or stipend programs, the tanker security program, maritime security program, the cable ship security program, which would enforce 100% cargo preference, which would defend any attacks on the Jones Act, and it would come up with new mechanisms such as tax incentives, bilateral trade agreements, quotas, import-export quotas for U.S. flag vessels that could be increased over time to build a reasonable size U.S. fleet engaged in foreign trade. It could carry a reasonable proportion of its cargo. Right now, the U.S. carries about 2% of its foreign trade, seaborne foreign trade, on U.S. flag vessels, less than that actually, and it's totally unacceptable. After the Second World War, we were at 60% or more, 65, 70%. And that's come down to barely a presence in international trade. So that would be one, a comprehensive national maritime policy, supported long-term policy, not a one-year appropriations that are currently in these maritime stipend programs, long-term program with long-term planning and a national commitment. I would also urge that U.S. policy be more active in international regulation and conventions. The United States, has not signed the Maritime Labor Convention. We have not pushed for any further stronger enforcement of international maritime conventions. The IMO has many laws or conventions on the books, but sadly, impotent enforcement policy. And this creates a downgrading of conditions for seafarers around the world and globally. Thirdly, I think the key is for the United States to enforce and make sure ship owners have our corporate responsibility of ship owners. A U.S. owner should fly the U.S. flag if they want to do business in the United States, and the flag of convenience system should be phased out. It's a corrupt system of tax avoidance, of anonymity of ship owners, of finding the lowest cost labor globally, and of skirting regulation at will. And this system needs to be rolled back. There needs to be corporate responsibility at sea, just as there does on land. And the start of this is rolling back the flag of convenience system, which we, as a national government, and the same as UK, certainly have the ability to do so if there's a will to get this done. So those are my hopes or dreams or recommendations, however you want to phrase it.
Well, thank you both for your perspectives on these critical issues for maritime security and resilience. The full report on NATO merchant fleets and maritime capabilities is available through the link in the description below. You can also find it on the Nautilus International website. Mark Dickinson from Nautilus International and Don Marcus from Masters, Mates and Pilots, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Mark.